The year was 1570, and across the royal courts of Europe, whispers carried news that would shock even the most cynical courtiers. A 14-year-old girl, barely past childhood, was about to be bound in marriage to a man who should have been her protector, not her husband, her uncle. This wasn't some barbaric custom from a distant land. This was happening at the very heart of European civilization, sanctioned by the most powerful families on the continent. Anna of Austria's story begins not with romance or fairy tale dreams, but with the cold calculation of political necessity. Her fate was sealed before she could even comprehend what marriage meant, before she understood the devastating price she would pay for being born into royalty. What transpired in her short life would become one of history's most haunting examples of how young women were sacrificed on the altar of dynastic ambition. But this isn't just another tale of royal tragedy. Anna's story reveals the brutal machinery behind Europe's golden age, where children were currency and human dignity was expendable. Her marriage to her uncle Philip II of Spain would unleash consequences that rippled through generations, leaving behind a legacy written in blood, madness, and broken promises. Today, we strip away the gilded veneer of Habsburg power to examine the unflinching reality of what happened when politics collided with a young girl's humanity. To understand the full horror of Anna's fate, we must first grasp the world that created it. The Habsburg dynasty in the 16th century was a sprawling empire that stretched across continents, held together by an intricate web of strategic marriages. These weren't unions of love. They were business transactions designed to consolidate power, secure borders, and maintain the delicate balance of European politics. Anna was born into this system in 1549, the daughter of Maximilian II, Holy Roman Emperor, and Maria of Spain. From the moment she drew her first breath, her value was measured not in potential happiness or personal fulfillment, but in the political alliances her marriage could secure. She was raised knowing that her destiny lay not in her own choices, but in the dynastic needs of her family. The Habsburg obsession with keeping power within the family had created a twisted family tree where uncles married nieces, cousins wed cousins, and bloodlines became dangerously concentrated. This wasn't accidental, it was deliberate policy. Every marriage was calculated to prevent Habsburg lands and titles from passing to rival dynasties. But the human cost of this strategy was catastrophic, and Anna would become one of its most tragic victims. Philip II of Spain, Anna's future husband, was already a figure of legend by the time their marriage was arranged. 31 years older than his intended bride, he had already buried 2 wives and ruled over the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Spanish gold flowed from the Americas, funding armies that could crush rebellions from the Netherlands to the Mediterranean. Philip was the most feared monarch in Europe, a man whose word could start wars and whose displeasure could topple kingdoms. But Philip was also Anna's uncle, her father's brother-in-law, a man who had watched her grow from infancy. The very relationship that should have made him her protector instead made him her predator, sanctioned by law and blessed by the church. This perversion of family bonds was not seen as abnormal in Habsburg circles. It was simply the price of maintaining power. The negotiations for Anna's marriage began when she was barely 12 years old. Diplomats shuttled between Vienna and Madrid, haggling over dowries and political concessions, while the girl at the center of these discussions continued her childhood education, blissfully unaware of the fate being sealed in distant palaces. Her tutors taught her languages, music, and embroidery, skills deemed appropriate for a royal wife, but no one prepared her for the psychological devastation that awaited her. By 1570, the arrangements were complete. Anna, now 14 and barely recognizable as the child she had been just years earlier, received word that she would travel to Spain to marry the most powerful man in the world. Contemporary accounts describe her reaction as one of dutiful acceptance. She had been raised to understand that personal desires were irrelevant when weighed against dynastic necessity, but private letters suggest a different story, revealing a young woman terrified of leaving everything familiar for a foreign court and a husband old enough to be her father. The journey from Vienna to Spain became a procession of mounting dread. Anna traveled with an elaborate entourage befitting her status, but the luxury of her surroundings could not disguise the fact that she was essentially being delivered like cargo to her new owner. Each mile that separated her from home brought her closer to a future she could not escape, could not refuse, and could not understand. Spanish court etiquette was among the most rigid in Europe, a suffocating maze of protocol that transformed every human interaction into a performance. For a 14-year-old girl accustomed to the relatively informal atmosphere of the Austrian court, this new environment must have felt like a prison constructed entirely of ceremony and surveillance. Every gesture was scrutinized, every word weighed for political implications, every moment choreographed according to ancient traditions that valued appearance over humanity. Philip II's court was also a place where fear ruled through calculated displays of power. The king's authority was absolute, his temper legendary, and his capacity for cruelty well documented. Courtiers who fell from favor simply disappeared, their fates serving as warnings to others who might consider challenging royal will. Into this environment came Anna, a child expected to navigate political currents that had destroyed men twice her age. The wedding ceremony itself was a masterpiece of propaganda, designed to showcase Habsburg unity and Spanish power. Nobles from across Europe attended, bearing gifts and offering congratulations that masked their private horror at witnessing a child being legally bound to her uncle. The church provided its blessing, transforming what nature would consider abhorrent into something sacred and politically necessary. But beneath the pageantry lay a more sinister reality. Anna was not gaining a husband. She was losing her identity, her autonomy, and her chance at anything resembling a normal life. The marriage that was supposed to strengthen the Habsburg dynasty would instead reveal its fundamental weakness, the human cost of treating people as political instruments rather than living beings deserving of dignity and protection. Contemporary observers noted the stark contrast between the magnificent ceremony and the obvious distress of the bride. While Philip appeared every inch the conquering monarch, Anna seemed fragile and overwhelmed, a child playing dress-up in adult ceremonies she could not comprehend. The wedding feast lasted for days, with entertainment designed to celebrate the union, but those who looked closely could see the fear in Anna's eyes as she sat beside her new husband, realizing that her childhood was officially over. The consummation of the marriage marked the beginning of Anna's true ordeal. Medical knowledge of the time provided no protection for young girls thrust into adult relationships before their bodies were ready. The physical trauma was compounded by the psychological devastation of intimacy with a man who represented not love or partnership, but the complete surrender of personal will to dynastic necessity. Philip's expectations of his young wife extended far beyond the bedroom. As Queen of Spain, Anna was expected to produce heirs while simultaneously serving as a diplomatic asset in her husband's complex political maneuvering. She had to master court intrigue while remaining submissive to her husband's authority, navigate religious controversies while maintaining perfect Catholic orthodoxy, and represent Spanish interests while never forgetting her subordinate position in the marriage. The pressure was enormous and relentless. Every aspect of Anna's life became subject to scrutiny and control, from her daily schedule to her choice of companions. She existed in a gilded cage where luxury could not compensate for the complete absence of personal freedom or genuine affection. The early months of Anna's marriage revealed the true nature of her imprisonment. While Spanish propaganda portrayed the union as a triumph of Habsburg unity, the reality within the palace walls told a different story. Anna's daily routine became a carefully orchestrated performance designed to maintain the illusion of royal happiness while concealing the growing tragedy of her situation. Philip's treatment of his young wife oscillated between cold indifference and calculated manipulation. He viewed Anna not as a person deserving of care and consideration, but as a valuable asset requiring proper maintenance to ensure optimal political returns. Their interactions were formal and stilted, conducted under the watchful eyes of courtiers whose primary loyalty lay with the king, rather than his child bride. The Spanish court's obsession with ceremony transformed every moment of Anna's existence into a public spectacle. She could not eat, pray, or even walk through the palace corridors without adherence to protocols that had been established centuries earlier. These rituals, supposedly designed to honor royal dignity, instead became instruments of psychological torture for a girl who yearned for simple human connection and genuine affection. Anna's attempts to establish friendships within the court were systematically undermined by Philip's paranoia and controlling nature. Any lady-in-waiting who showed genuine warmth toward the young queen found herself reassigned or dismissed entirely. The king understood that isolated subjects were compliant subjects, and he applied this principle ruthlessly to his own wife. The physical demands placed upon Anna's developing body became increasingly apparent as months turned to years. Philip expected her to fulfill her primary duty as queen, producing male heirs to secure the dynasty's future. But Anna's youth made pregnancy dangerous, and the primitive medical understanding of the era provided little protection against the complications that inevitably arose. Court physicians, more concerned with maintaining royal favor than protecting their patients' health, administered treatments that often caused more harm than healing. They prescribed bloodletting for weakness, purging for digestive complaints, and various herbal concoctions that had no basis in medical science. Anna became a living laboratory for ineffective remedies while her actual health needs went unaddressed. The psychological toll of her situation manifested in ways that alarmed even the most callous observers. Anna developed nervous habits that betrayed her inner turmoil, constant fidgeting with her jewelry, an inability to maintain eye contact during conversations, and sudden episodes of trembling when Philip entered a room. These symptoms were dismissed by court officials as natural feminine weakness, rather than recognized as signs of severe psychological distress. Religious faith, which might have provided comfort to other young women in similar circumstances, became another source of torment for Anna. The Spanish court's extreme Catholic orthodoxy demanded not just outward compliance but genuine spiritual conviction. Anna was expected to find joy in suffering, to embrace her sacrifice as divinely ordained, and to suppress any doubts about the righteousness of her situation. Her confessors, carefully selected by Philip, reinforced these messages during private spiritual consultations that were anything but private. Every conversation was reported back to the king, ensuring that even Anna's most intimate thoughts became subject to royal scrutiny and control. The one relationship that should have provided solace and guidance instead became another mechanism of surveillance and manipulation. The broader political context of Anna's marriage began to reveal its true purpose as European conflicts intensified. Philip's empire faced challenges on multiple fronts: Protestant rebellions in the Netherlands, Ottoman expansion in the Mediterranean, and English interference with Spanish shipping. Anna's Habsburg connections provided crucial diplomatic leverage in these struggles, making her value as a political asset even more significant than her role as wife and potential mother. Letters between Philip and other European monarchs frequently referenced Anna's family connections and the potential alliances her position could secure. She was discussed like a chess piece, moved strategically across the board of European politics without regard for her personal wishes or well-being. The girl who had once dreamed of a life beyond palace walls found herself trapped at the very center of international intrigue. The Spanish nobility's reaction to their young queen revealed the deep contradictions within Habsburg society. Publicly, they celebrated Anna's beauty, piety, and grace, while privately expressing concerns about her youth and the obvious strain of her position. Some genuinely sympathized with her plight, but dared not voice their concerns for fear of incurring Philip's wrath. Anna's correspondence with her family in Austria became increasingly desperate as she struggled to adapt to her new circumstances. Her letters, carefully monitored by Spanish officials, spoke of homesickness and longing for familiar faces, but the deeper anguish remained hidden between the lines. She had learned that expressing genuine emotions could be used against her, so she crafted messages that revealed little while saying much. The transformation of Anna's personality became evident to those who had known her before the marriage. The lively, curious child who had once delighted in learning new languages and exploring palace gardens became withdrawn and anxious. Her natural intelligence, which had impressed tutors in Austria, was now directed toward navigating court politics rather than pursuing genuine intellectual interests. Philip's increasing demands for public displays of marital harmony forced Anna to become an accomplished actress, performing happiness and contentment for audiences who knew better but dared not acknowledge the truth. These performances became more elaborate and frequent as political pressures mounted, turning Anna's entire existence into a carefully choreographed deception. The physical changes in Anna's appearance provided stark evidence of her deteriorating condition. Court painters, skilled in flattering their subjects, struggled to conceal the toll that stress and isolation had taken on the young queen's face. Her portraits from this period show a woman aged beyond her years, with eyes that reflected profound sadness despite the formal smile required by royal protocol. The arrival of other Habsburg relatives at the Spanish court provided Anna with brief respites from her isolation, but these visits also served as painful reminders of the life she had lost. Seeing cousins and siblings who retained some measure of personal freedom highlighted the complete surrender of autonomy that marriage had required of her. Anna of Austria's tragedy stands as a devastating reminder of how power corrupts not just those who wield it, but the very institutions designed to protect the innocent. Her story strips away the romantic myths we tell ourselves about royal marriages, revealing the brutal calculus that transformed children into political commodities and human dignity into negotiable currency. The young girl who entered marriage at 14 never lived to see adulthood in any meaningful sense. She existed instead as a carefully maintained illusion, a queen who ruled nothing, not even her own life. Her suffering was not an unfortunate side effect of dynastic politics. It was the intended outcome, the price that powerful men deemed acceptable for maintaining their grip on European power. Today, as we confront our own struggles with exploitation and abuse, Anna's voice echoes across the centuries with uncomfortable relevance. Her silence was enforced, her pain dismissed, her humanity sacrificed for the greater good of those who benefited from her suffering. The systems that destroyed her life were not accidents of history, but deliberate choices made by people who valued power over compassion, control over human dignity. In remembering Anna of Austria, we honor not just her memory, but our obligation to recognize the signs of institutional cruelty and to speak for those whose voices have been silenced by the powerful.